Listeners beware, you're in for a scare. G'day folks, welcome to Nightmare on Fear Street, an R.L.Stine podcast. Today, I'm your host Meg.
I'm your other host Zack.
And today we have a really special episode for you guys. Do you wanna tell the listeners what's going on today, Zack?
So, we decided that we were gonna go to a graveyard in an unmarked part of town and make a blood sacrifice. And we wished.
Get out the Ouija board.
We got out the Ouija board. We stole some leprechaun gold.
We communed with the spirits and we said, "Oh, spirits, bring to us the best person that we could have on an interview."
And then it's like, sure, here's his email address. And we sent him an email and he was totally like, yeah. So Meg, I'll let you hand it off. Who do we have today?
Today we are speaking to Tim Jacobus. And if that name doesn't sound familiar to you, what are you doing on this podcast? He is the illustrator who did all of the covers for the original Goosebumps book.
Yes, so if you were a kid in the early 90s and you did not see Goosebumps, what was wrong with you? If you saw a picture of him back then, you would know it's a Goosebumps cover because of how distinctive it was.
Tim, can you hear us?
Absolutely. How are you guys doing today?
All right, good, yeah.
We're doing wonderful.
Yeah, we usually don't do like three people at once. Usually it is just me and Zack, and it's a bit difficult because, I'm all the way in Australia. And where are you based, Tim?
I'm based in northern New Jersey. I'm about 50 miles outside of New York City.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I'm originally from North Carolina. I've actually got a cousin who lives in New Jersey. You ever seen the Jersey Devil, Tim?
When we were kids, we used to go looking, but no, I've never seen it.
Well, speaking of when you were kids, I know that R.L.Stine has talked a lot about how his work was inspired by classic horror movies and Golden Age comic books that he used to read when he was a kid. Does your inspiration come from that same sort of area?
Actually, no. I was kind of a chicken as a kid, and I didn't watch a lot of horror movies because they scared me to death. I was a comic book guy, but I tended towards the kid next door. He had the older brothers, and they had all the Sergeant Rock and stuff like that. And my buddy and I used to try to mimic the drawings that were in the comic books. So I was influenced by comic books, but the horror stuff came much later.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I can remember being a kid and having my Archie comics and like tracing over the pictures to sort of see how the shapes went together.
Yeah, for me, it was always trying to copy The Simpsons. So I would trace every Simpsons comic I owned.
But that's just it. You see it for the first time when you're younger in print, and you see it as basic shapes, and you go, oh, you know what? Maybe I can do this. And nobody should ever feel bad about tracing, because we all traced when we were younger, and tracing is what kind of teach you the fundamentals. It's, it's the calisthenics of learning to draw. So, it's a lot of people just say that often. That's like, oh, when I was a kid, I just traced. Well, that's how it all gets started.
Yep, I still have a hard time coloring in the lines with a coloring book.
When I was asking people that I knew, like, what do you want me to say to Tim Jacobus, the illustrator of the Goosebumps book, and a lot of my friends sort of share the same sentiment as me, telling me he did a great job being R.L.Stine's like hype man, because sometimes the covers were scarier than the books.
Yeah,
and vice versa, Yeah, it wasn't always the case. It wasn't a one-sided, one-way street there. But thank you very much. I appreciate all the sentiment.
Yeah. So related to that, like, how much freedom did they give you when you were making the covers? Did you have to were they concerned about you really sticking to the story, or were you sort of allowed to do what was like artistically the most interesting thing?
It was kind of freeform, because in order to meet production schedules, R.L.Stine was writing the book at the same time I was doing the cover. So most times I never saw a complete book. I would see maybe a couple of paragraphs. Sometimes it would be as little as a couple of sentences. So,
wow.
Which you would think would be some sort, a little bit of a handicap, but that also works in your favor because it's not as rigid, and then a chance to wander.
So I have a question, Tim. Did you have to follow like the Marvel method of they would just give you like a title or something and you would just start drawing and then they'd just be like, we're just gonna put the letters in later on?
If you look at the format of the original Goosebumps, there was a format to the book, but the art was always a square. And the Goosebumps text was, so I worked inside that frame. So all that area was mine. So I didn't have to take into consideration, that top 1/3, that's going to be where the title goes. I better be careful that the lightning bolt doesn't go and, will blank out some of the text. So, I had my area was my area. So I could kind of go to town in it. We generally would just, I didn't work with R.L.Stine, and I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have. Authors and illustrators very rarely have any communication with each other. Authors work with editors, and then editors work with art directors, and then art directors work with illustrators. So we're a couple of steps away from each other. What was nice is that the art directors at Scholastic at the time were very open people. We would talk about stuff, and I would always submit 3 different sketches for every book. Back then, this was pre-digital, so these were pencil sketches, 8.5 by 11, so that I could fax them over. We were doing faxes, and they would then look at them and have a meeting and go, yeah, we like number 2 seems to be the way to go. Sometimes it would be, we like a little bit of what's going on in sketch number 1, but can you take that and combine it with such and such, in sketch number 2. So that was the extent of the first go around. And at that point I would just go to final painting. There was no intermediate step. They never questioned me on my colors. And as you could tell, looking at those books, every cover had a different color scheme and color formula. That was a very conscious effort. And the longer the series went, the harder it was not to duplicate or at least not make it exactly the same as any other cover.
That was always one of the most appealing things about the covers to me, is that every book had its own sort of color scheme. It was sort of like how in Pixar movies they do the color scripts. You could probably do a color script of Goosebumps, book by book.
And it was nice too, because the people at Scholastic who were the designers on the other end caught on real quick as well. So not only did my artwork color scheme change, but they also changed the colors of the books and the color of the font. So if you take a look at them, the colors that were picked were very complementary to the colors in my art. And again, you put all those books side by side and no one of them is exactly the same as the other. And it wasn't something that we all talked about. It wasn't like, okay, hey, this is the big game plan. It just was everybody kind of just being synchronized on our own and getting a good result.
You talked a little bit about how it was different to do pencil and paper sketches and having to fax things back and forth. How do you think your art practice has changed since the 90s with the advent of all the digital stuff that people are doing now?
It's a double-edged sword. It was... When it first came along, I was very intimidated because I had gotten to the point where I felt my art skills were real good. It's like learning how to play the guitar, and you become this, you virtuoso. You play what you want to play. What's in your head is what comes out your hands. And then they come along and they take your guitar away and they say, okay, now you're going to play the oboe. And it's some, everything about it was different. And the first couple of years were very frustrating, and I wasn't a technical person to start with. But then as things came along and you start to learn to play that instrument, you find that there's a lot of new things that you could do differently. The thing about it is that, digital art is very efficient. It's easy to move. The amount of money and time I spent Federal Expressing paintings to clients or, and then having them Federal Express them back, and the time loss and all that.
Yeah.
The digital world's wonderful. Yeah, I can hand you my file. We both can open it at the same time. You can say, hey, that purple background would be cool. Let's see what it looks like in green. I can change it in a matter of 10 seconds. We can both go, oh, that's ugly, or yeah, we like that. Let's go in that direction. So it's open doors like that. I try to still keep a certain amount of that, non-digital feel, traditional stuff. So when I start all my projects, they still start with pencil and a piece of paper, and the scribbles go down on paper, and the initial roughs and everything still have that fluid feel to them. And then I scan them in, and I start working over top of that. So at least at the beginning, they're old school, and then I bring them in from there, and that's when the digital world starts to move forward. The other thing that helps keep that traditional feel is I work with a thing called the Wacom tablet. You may or may not be familiar with it.
I have one of those. I use a Wacom tablet. So. Yeah,
they're wonderful. So it's for the people who are listening who don't know what that is, it's a pad area, and there's a pen that's made for the pad, and what you draw on the pad comes out on the screen. And there's modes that you can switch to. You can say, make it work like a pen, make it work like a pencil, make it work like an airbrush. So those skills, those hand movement skills are still relevant. And I spent a lot of time making sure that the digital stuff that I do now really does look like the stuff that I used to do back in the day when it was just acrylic paints and airbrush.
Yeah, I had a look at your portfolio online, and yeah, your new stuff, it does still have the same feel. And I think that's really cool that you've been able to transfer your sort of traditional art aesthetic into the digital form, because I think not a lot of artists can do that. And speaking as somebody who's only been an artist since Photoshop has been around, I can't really imagine what that would be like. I mean, I do some painting, but having to switch totally from traditional to digital, I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, it was, and again, at the beginning, there wasn't a lot of, it's wonderful now. My kid jumps right in. He says, oh, I want to learn Photoshop. He can go over to YouTube, watch 10 videos about how to do it in 5 minutes, sit back down and have a basic assumption. And if he does have a question, he can either go to some board and ask the question, and information is free flowing. Early on, it just wasn't the case. And you just pounded your head against the desk going, all right, that didn't work. And I don't know why. And I don't have anybody I can ask. So the tools are great. I'm not one of those. I'm not so old that I go, this stuff is all garbage, and that's not real art, and real art is tangible, and that's just not true. It's still a very creative medium. I like it because there's a lot more people who I work with people who are not great drawers. They don't draw well. But that doesn't make them any less of a good artist or not have a good eye and no composition. And with the tools being the way they are, it's opened the market to more people. And I work with some very talented people who, can barely draw a stick figure. So it's interesting.
So Tim, what made you choose the path of being a children's illustrator? There's you could go to other fiction or cozy mysteries and stuff. What made you choose to do children horror spooky duke stuff?
Short story is it found me. When I went to art school, I had an instructor named Paul Stinson. Paul Stinson was a sci-fi fantasy paperback artist. Really nice guy. he, just came to our school on a whim. I went to a very tiny art school. We were in the downstairs to a doctor's office. It wasn't like some prestigious place at all. But we always had good teachers there, and they had a knack for finding good teachers. And the teachers that wasn't their job. They had regular art-related jobs, and they would just come and teach us 1 day a week. So 4 days a week, they were in the business world, and 1 day a week, they would come and work with us. This guy took a liking to me, and I said straight up front, yeah, I want to do paperback covers. I don't care. That's what I want to do. So he was always there to help me and tell me, what to do for the next step. He took me into, he said, all right, get your art together. I'm going to take you in to meet a real art director, and you sit there, and I want you to show him your work. And not that he's going to give you a job, but I want you to get used to this process of going in, sitting down, presenting yourself, and putting your best foot forward. And we did that, and what I learned right away was when I went into this art director's office, all around him, everywhere, were just hundreds of finished art just leaning up against the wall. These were jobs in progress. These were past jobs. And again, remember, no digital world. These are just paintings, all sizes, all styles, all methods. And as I sat there and I'm waiting to speak with this guy and I'm looking around, I'm just seeing one great piece of art after another, just amazing art. And I realized right away I had a student's portfolio, which was okay, but it was not, I couldn't hold a candle to any one of the pieces of artwork that were in that room. So when I left, I said, okay, I got to start. Basically start over. And I went home and I spent the next 2 years painting 10 good paintings that I could take into the city that would be more representative of what I could do. So, I spent 2 years prior to getting my first job just working on my portfolio so it looked just right, so I could take that next step forward. My first job was not science fiction. It wasn't fantasy. It wasn't horror. It was a African wildlife painting. There was a book called The Great Thirst, watering hole, animals all around it. Again, that had nothing to do with the things that I was showing in my portfolio, but the guy liked me and he liked my art, and that was my first cover.
I know it's always good to get your foot in the door. It's the most important thing in life.
Yeah.
It is, and very much so when you're a freelance illustrator. That first job is paramount, because you go to the next person and they're going to go, okay, well, what have you done? Well, you say, oh, I worked with Jerry Cunahan down at Simon & Schuster, and I did this job, and I completed it, which is the big thing. I completed it, and I completed it on time. And then the next person goes, all right, somebody else took the chance. Well, you've already semi-proven yourself, so I'll give you one. And then when you have two, you're even better off. So my second book was a science fiction style. Was a more science fiction fantasy style, something a little bit more along the lines of what you see me do. And I actually finished the second job before the first job. That really got us, got the ball rolling. But it was slow. It was slow moving. It wasn't like it was a floodgate thing where you said, okay, I got my first job and I'll just continue to get jobs whenever I want them. And it was very slow. You'd get, you'd do 3 jobs in a year. You'd do then 6 in a year, which means you have to go do another job. I was working on construction sites. I was, you name it, I did it. I worked in when I worked in canneries in Alaska. I did just terrible jobs. But that was the idea. I didn't want to take a good cushy job, because if I took a good cushy job, I could have easily fell off and said, this cushy job is fine. The art thing is too hard.
Yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate.
And so the idea of going to that crummy job during the day, I was I was a garbage man. there's nothing wrong with being a garbage man, but you after getting up at 4:00 in the morning and riding on the back of the truck, you come home and you go, yeah, I want to do something else for a living. And I would sit right down and go, okay, time to paint. And so that was my method. And slowly but surely, I started to get some more jobs. The way I got to Goosebumps, though, I'm going to fast forward a little bit, is I had done a few other individual books, no series. And again, I was making my deadlines and was proving to be reliable. And I did a bunch of books. Back then, they called them Women in Jeopardy. And they were always written from a woman's point of view. And it was always, almost every story was the suburban mom who stumbles onto some mystery and she ends up becoming a sleuth and, uncovers the hidden crime ring or something along those lines. So we started to do these books and I started to push the color in those. My original color palette was very muted because I was a serious horror guy. And when I started doing these Women in Jeopardy, I noticed that, that just the colors, they lent themselves to the theme. And I also started to do some of that distortion work. Now, it wasn't distorted like Goosebumps distorted. By the time I got to Goosebumps, I was just trying to see how radical we could get with the distortion before it stopped working. But so those handful of books, and I probably did, I don't know, a half a dozen, maybe 10 of those Women in Jeopardy books. So when the idea of Goosebumps came along, they said, well, you know what? Maybe Tim will work in this situation. So let's see. Yeah. And just to complete that path, and it's something that I've mentioned before in interviews, is they didn't just pick me and go, yeah, Tim Jacobus, he's the guy. He can do Goosebumps. Two things there. First off, they didn't just pick me. They couldn't decide whether it was going to be me or another illustrator who was working at the time for Scholastic. He was more of a traditional horror guy. He had been around. He was probably a little older than me at the time. I was, somewhat young. And they couldn't decide between the two of us. And they said, well, how about we do this? Tim, you do book number 1. And Jim, you do book number 2. And when we see what we get at the end, we'll decide who's going to go on from there. It wasn't that they, this was this huge competition. And we also had no idea that there was going to be hundreds of Goosebumps books. It was something that was, hey, there might be 4, there might be 6. So, I knew Jim. I wasn't friends with him, but, it's not like we were enemies or rivals or anything like that. It was just like, all right, hey, I'll do mine, you do yours, and whoever gets the other one, well, good for them, and we'll take it from there.
The spirit of competition.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it wasn't like that at all. And, at the time it was, oh, well, if, Jim's talented, if he gets it, yeah, well, good, because he's good. My heart would not be broken by, going, oh, I was much better or something. Not the case at all. Jim's was a great artist. But what I was told after the fact and years later was it was the colors that was the difference in the decision-making process, because R.L.Stine had been writing for a little bit older audience, and Goosebumps was geared for that next group lower. And they were concerned that, his stuff might be inappropriate or not, just not on par. And they, I think when they saw the colors, that helped take the edge off of the, whatever images are on there. Once you start using carnival colors and there's pink in there, it's just not as scary.
I still found it pretty scary. I can remember going to the bookstore with my mom and dad as a little girl and finding the cover to You Can't Scare Me, the one with the mudmen coming up out of the bog. And that gave me nightmares. I was so scared of that cover that I didn't read that book until I was an adult.
Now, if you want to hear the one that scares me, and I still don't look at it today, Tim. It's Why I'm Afraid of Bees. Like, it made me cry the first time I have a phobia of bees, and even though it's the least threatening Goosebumps cover you probably could make, it terrifies me.
That wouldn't be in my top. That wouldn't be in my top 10 of the scary ones. Now the Mudmen, that was right up there because that one had a little bit more realistic. The Mudmen were kind of realistic looking, it was dark. That one was dark.
Yeah, going back and looking at it, that one's a fantastic cover. I really love the sort of red orange color palette on that book.
Yeah, but then what sets it off is there's a teal blue reflective secondary light that comes on from the left. And that makes the oranges pop even more. Most people in those situations, most of us were taught you just kind of fill your shadow areas with dark or with black. And again, once we got into the Goosebumps stuff, not only did I push it darker, then I would just fill it with another color just to fill it with another color.
But it did give me nightmares when I was little. And then I went to a YMCA camp when I was about 6 or 7, and one of my friends had that book, and I was like, get it away from me. I don't want to look at those spooky mug men.
Yeah, no, there's so many great covers that you have, and they're very, in our zeitgeist of if you just show it to somebody, they'd be like, oh, that's a Goosebumps cover, such as Night in Terror Tower is, the one that I can show anyone, and they'll be like, oh, that's a Goosebumps.
One of my favorite ones is the one for Werewolf Skin. Where it has the box, and it's got a crumpled up werewolf skin, and the eyes are kind of bugging out and looking at you. I just think that's so cool.
But see that, and it then from my perspective, this is all insanity because I spent a number of years doing covers prior to Goosebumps. I forget how many. Let's just say 10, and and I did 100 covers. And at no time could anybody name one book that I did other than my mother and could tell the name or the cover or anything about it. And all of a sudden, Goosebumps comes along, and I can say cuckoo clock of doom to you guys, and you know what I'm talking about. That just blows my mind. Right, but what's even more mind blowing is. Here it is. We're at our 25th anniversary of the first book, just a couple of, last month or this month, I forget. It's right around now. I'm still saying to people, hey, Phantom from the Auditorium. And they're like, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're supposed to have forgotten that by now.
Yeah, no, what is it? I have a funny story. So I was working out with my fitness trainer a couple days ago. And he's like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I do a podcast all about R.L.Stine stuff. And he's like, oh, the first one that I ever read, he just started describing the cover. And it was like, oh, wait, that was Welcome to Dead House. This guy's 36. And he didn't know the name of the book, but he could describe the cover. So you've done such a wonderful job.
Oh yeah, so many people that I know remember the covers so much more strongly than they remember the books, and I think it is because a lot of the time, I don't know, I feel like a lot of parents didn't let their kids read the actual books, so their covers were the experience of Goosebumps. The imagination of a child is such a powerful thing that you look at the cover and you come up with a story that's 25 times scarier than what's in the book.
Guys, it was the camera.
It was the camera. Oh, that's another one of my favorites for one of the sillier covers is the Say Cheese and Die, where you've got the skeleton family having a barbecue.
Yeah, that was one of the. That's an early one too. Yeah, that's book book 3 or something, right?
I think it's
my
5.
Memory isn't as good as
5.
Yeah, but it was early. Yeah.
Well, we just did an episode about it a few weeks ago.
And we just commented how the cover was actually scarier than the actual book because
the book itself is kind of bland.
We try to debunk okay, how the skeleton's eating and stuff. It was the funniest thing.
Yeah, and how do they have? Why does the mom skeleton have hair?
Well, why does he have mom jeans on?
That sort of mix of scary and whimsical is really really cool. So Tim, when they re-released all of the Goosebumps books with new covers recently, and the ones that I actually got at my bookstore locally for this show are the new covers, and Zach and I will often, because Zach has a lot of the classic ones, because he gets his from, old libraries and secondhand shops, and mine are not secondhand. I just got them in this big box. They were selling them for like one book for $3, which was great. But Zach and I often get into like discussions over which book version has the better cover. And what do you think about, like, when you look at the new version? Have you seen any of the new versions of the books? And if you have, what do you think about the covers?
The latest ones, I've seen, the new series that R.L.Stine is doing. They've had a couple of artists, and that's the natural progression to books and book covers. The fact that I got to do so many is incredibly rare for so many years. Usually they change up artists often because it helps, it makes it different, it makes it new, and it may be the same author writing, not saying R.L.Stine's writing similar stories, but it just is a way of repackaging. So, it's something that I'm used to. So sure, would I like to be doing the Goosebumps cover, once a month? Yeah, that would be great. It would be fun. But it's also good that they've got some new blood on there, and they've got some new styles, and maybe open it up to a different generation who will be remembering what the name of the cover is when they're 32 years old.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question for you, Tim. So one thing that we do on our show is we try to review knockoff Goosebumps books. So like books that are just flat imitations of them. Have you ever like seen a cover of a book and thought, wow, they're ripping me off?
Yeah, I have seen my, I can't call it my style. I've seen stuff that looks like my work. What was funny is back in the day when Goosebumps was out, I didn't have any sort of exclusive contract with Scholastic. So it wasn't that, they locked me, into, you can only do this type of book for us. So other publishers were doing Goosebumps-like books, and I was doing the covers for them too. So I was my own competition on the shelves. Bone Chillers and Spine Tinglers.
You did Bone Chillers?
Yeah, I did some of them. I didn't do them all, but yeah.
I've only read one Bone Chillers book. This is like a recurring bit that we do on the shows. I had this one Bone Chillers book that I read when I was a kid. It was called Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club, and the cover is like a pram with this like monster arm hanging out at the side of it, and it's bright pink. And that book traumatized me because the story is very dark. Did you do that one? It's a baby carriage, right? With the arm sticking out. Yeah, I did that. Yeah. Oh, no.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
It's all connected.
This is like, okay, I'm about to like leave and go like to like Mexico right now. This is scary.
We know too much, Zach.
Exactly. Everything's wound very tight. Wound very tight.
Meg, why is there a pizza van outside my house and says FBI?
Yeah, well, speaking of...
That's funny you remember that one. Yeah,
Yeah, I only remember it because it's like, to this day, it's one of the only books that has scared me so much that I couldn't go to sleep after reading it. Because just the story was very, very dark for a kid's book.
So with Goosebumps, like I said, R.L. was writing them at the same time I was doing the illustrations. And then I would, I used to go to this, and I still do. I go to schools and I talk to kids about a career in the arts, and, inevitably Goosebumps comes up. And back then kids used to go, okay, well, they used to quiz me on the stories. And for the longest time, I hadn't read any. And, now I'm embarrassed because, I'm involved in this juggernaut, and I hadn't read any of the books. So I had to go back and, cram and get my chops. And so I started to read them on a more regular basis. But the Bone Chillers and Spine Tinglers, I never went and read them, so I have no idea what that carriage story was about.
It was about a girl, and she gets hired to be a babysitter for this family, and they keep their child. They say to her that the child's already gone in bed, but she hears these, like, noises coming from the room. And then eventually she finds this, like, secret lab in the basement, and she finds out that the child isn't really a child, it's their dog that they brought back to life after it got hit by a car. And, that is sort of a twist, and what happens is the parents will go out every night and they'll, like, get, like, corpses from the graveyard to feed to this, like, monster dog. And the babysitter is there to stop him from her from getting out of the house. And so the fact that it's a dog is a twist. So the whole time you're reading this, you're reading the journals of the parents who are both scientists, and you're imagining in your head like a baby getting hit by a car, which is horrifying.
Exactly. That's a wicked dark kid story.
Yeah, it's very, very dark. And the dog's name is like Princess or something, and it ends with the girl electrocuting it, and it's very, very twisted. It's not for kids at all. It's
Absolutely
like
not.
an episode of Masters of Horror almost.
Oh my god. So Tim, you are now responsible for another traumatic event in someone's life.
Yep.
I guess if we keep at this long enough, there's going to be very few degrees of separation of nightmares to Tim Jacobus ratios.
Yeah. Hey Tim, has anyone ever sent you like bills for their like psychiatry?
Not yet, but let's not encourage anybody. I can't even afford my own.
Now to take it back to like modern versions of the Goosebumps books, I went to the theaters to see the Goosebumps movie last year, and they had this really cool animated sequence over the end credits, and it was basically like they've taken your illustrations from the original books and brought them to life. Were you involved in that at all, or did they just sort of say, can we use your art again for this? And then...
So the way that transpired was pretty interesting. So, the Goosebumps movie, I heard about it. I stay in contact with R.L.Stine. We're not like best buddies and hang out, but, we email one another and just check in. And we did do a comic convention like 2.5 years ago in Canada together. And while we were there, they were, the discussion was about the Goosebumps movie. And at that point, they had shot the live part of the movie, and they were in post-production where they were, then working on all the, the special effects and after-the-fact graphics. And, I wasn't involved at all, but I was fascinated by the whole thing. And it got close to the movie was, I believe, it was released in like October, like around Halloween time. And it was right around this time of year. It was Labor Day weekend prior to the movie coming out. I get this weird phone call from this guy, and he says, we have a project and we can't tell you what it is. And, I need you to sign a non-disclosure. And, it's, now non-disclosures are not rare, and, we all sign them.
No.
And but the last thing, right. But the last thing I'm thinking it is Goosebumps, because it's too late. Like, to me, Goosebumps is already done. So they call me and they say, hey, we're working on the end of the movie. Now, if now when you go back, and look at the movie, at the very end, Jack Black walks up to the glass case. His typewriter starts going.
Yeah, and
he knows it's the Invisible Boy.
Yep.
He turns to the camera and he screams.
Yeah.
And then his live face morphs into a Goosebumps cover. And then it just dissipates away. Right. What happened was they were trying to do their own version of a Goosebumps cover. They didn't like the way it was coming out. And same like you guys, they said, I wonder if he's still around. Maybe he could just paint a Goosebumps cover for us and we could be done with this. So that's what ended up happening. Was the original part. They called me up and said, listen, here, we'll give you a still of Jack Black, the last frame of the movie, and you do what you do and make it look like a Goosebumps book, and we'll drop it in the movie. So, my efforts of 30 hours of work are on the screen for about a second and a half. And if you blink, you're going to miss it. But it's there. But the whole time, I'm working with the guys who are doing the end of the movie and the closing credits. I'm not working with the regular production team. They're, like I said, they're pretty much done already and have moved on. But the guys who are doing the closing credits just kept telling me, they said, listen, we're doing something special and we're not going to tell you what it is. You just got to wait and see. So I had no idea what they were talking about. And most of the time when people tell you they're doing something special, they're not really doing anything special. So I was like, oh, that's great. That's great. I'm just happy I got a chance to do a piece of artwork and I'm part of this movie, like on some small scale. My artwork is in the movie, and I got my finger in the door to do something in this century that was Goosebumps related, and I was perfectly fine with that. It comes time to release the movie, and I get invited out to California to a theater, a small theater where they're going to do an advanced viewing of the movie. And me and my son, Jack, who is 18 at the time, we head out there to see the movie. And while I'm there, the director of the movie is there. There's a panel before the movie starts, and they're all, talking about the movie. I'm there, and I'm also signing some stuff. They got some prints made, and it was a fundraiser, so I signed these prints, and they did a raffle, and it was real nice. But it comes down to the end of the movie, and we're sitting there watching it, me and my son, and then they come over and they go, listen, you got to come back here. We need you to, do X, Y, and Z. So I'm forced to walk out of the movie before my artwork comes up and before I find out what the hell it is that everybody's saying is so special at the end of the movie. So I go back, and so Rob and his wife, super nice people, come over, we're having this nice conversation, and he's going, so, what'd you think, man? How'd you like the ending? And I look at my son, and he's laughing his head off, and he's going, yeah, dude, you missed the whole thing. He said the end of the movie was great. Your artwork was there, and I'm not going to tell you what happens after that. So I look at Rob, and I go, I don't have the slightest idea what happened. I said, don't tell me. Now I got to go home. I'm going to the movies. I'm going to sit in a theater, and I'm going to watch it through to the end. So it took until the following week before I saw all those animations. And I had no idea they were going to move, that my artwork was going to move. So when I first saw it, I was like, oh, that's cool. They put up the original artwork, nice mini tribute. But then when they started to move, I was like, yeah, that's cool. That's even better.
Is that when you turn to the next person next to you and said, that's my work. That's mine. It's all me.
Actually, I went to a really late. It was like a midnight showing in a small town. I was with my girlfriend, and it was her and I, and like 3 other people. So there was nobody to turn to say anything.
That's what about
your girlfriend. Did she clap?
My son, my family, my girlfriend, everybody is not very impressed by what I do. So it's all in good fun.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Tim. We've really enjoyed talking to you, and especially speaking as somebody who's working as a freelance animator and illustrator. It's been really awesome hearing about like how you started out and your different views on getting ahead in that sort of industry.
That's one thing I've never forgotten is, the out there at the beginning, it's tough, and, keep at it. Don't give up. And just your success is whatever it is, but don't ever walk away from anything in your life where you go, if I tried a little harder, it would have been different. Don't ever say that to yourself. You give it your all. If it pays off, it pays off. Stick with it. And I know I will never forget what it's like to be out there.
Do you want to plug like your website and anywhere people can find you on social media?
My website is garbage. It's timjacobus.com. I am rebuilding it. I have all the skills, but I have none of the time. So I am going to be at a convention in Parsippany, New Jersey at the end of September. It's called Chillers. It's a retro horror show. It's a lot of laughs. So if you're anywhere near the area, come on down to Chillers and check us out.
I'm Zach.
Okay. I'm Meg.
And I'm Tim.
And
stay
spooky.
spooky.